Elizabeth Palmer joins us now from Crimea. Liz, the State Department slammed Putin's campaign rally, reiterating that Crimea is a part of Ukraine. How is the Kremlin reacting to this?
It's unlikely the Kremlin will react at all. Seizing Ukraine was very popular with Russians. We're 3 days away from an election. It's a big vote getter for Putin. He's just going to stay the course. Furthermore, he's really doubled down because he scheduled Election Day, Sunday, on the very anniversary that Crimea was legally annexed to Russia. So he's underlining this every way possible, partly for Russian voters because it's very popular with them, and partly as a message to the West. He is never going to give this back.
I also want to get your take on this massive shakeup at the State Department this week. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson fired via tweet by President Trump. President Putin had joked recently that he wished he didn't give Rex Tillerson the country's highest honor back when he was an oil executive. Is his dismissal seen as a good thing for Russia?
Well, it's always tricky to read the Kremlin tea leaves. The one thing that Putin's spokesman has said this week is that relations between the U.S. and Russia could hardly get worse. So a change in the holder of the office of Secretary of State is not really, doesn't really mean bad things for us. On the other hand, if you believe, as many people do, that Russia is enjoying the instability in the United States and the extreme bipartisan fighting, it could be argued that, and if you accept that the U.S. is still viewed by Russia as an opponent, an adversary, then it can only help Russia to have its opponent weakened by big turmoil at the top.
And on that point of instability, you know, it's all American intelligence agencies which concluded that Russia's interference in the presidential election was more about sowing discord and diminishing trust in the democratic process. So I wondered, with the Department of State's announcement as well that the current CIA director, Mike Pompeo, would be taking Rex Tillerson's place, how that is viewed by President Putin.
I think they will be watching and waiting to see whether Mike Pompeo stiffens the White House resolve to push back against Russia. And one test coming up, of course, is the kind of support that the U.S. gives to Britain in its retaliation for what Britain alleges is the Russian state using a nerve agent on British soil. Is the U.S. Going to stand solidly behind Theresa May? That's probably the next thing that Russia will be watching very carefully with some trepidation.
Now, Sunday's election is coming on the heels of British Prime Minister Theresa May expelling 23 Russian diplomats, threatening to place sanctions on Russia after a former Russian double agent and his daughter were poisoned. They're in critical condition. The UK is blaming Russia. In any way, will this hurt Putin in the polls? In your report, you note that this is not a real contest.
On the contrary, to the extent that it's been a factor, and I have to say that Putin has not been referring to it in his rallies at all. He didn't. There was not a word of it today, for example, in Crimea. But word will be out there. Of course, the Russian papers will be covering it, and the view from here is this is just another unfounded allegation. Poor Russia is getting a raw deal from the West. They're always assumed to be guilty. Russia's saying, show us the evidence. We want to see it. We'll help to get to the bottom of this story, but it definitely wasn't a state-sponsored operation. I think to that extent it actually bolsters Putin's idea that he seeks to plant in Russian mind that this is Russia, Fortress Russia, and that the world is out to get it, and Russians need to have great solidarity with him in order to get justice and stay strong.
That's fascinating. And we should also note this would be Putin's fourth term as president. And this is despite the fact that you do have term limits in Russia. For the layman, just explain how Vladimir Putin was able to get around that.
Well, he had 2 terms, and then there is a 2-term limit, I should say. The terms were 4 years each, so he had 8 years in power. And then he stepped back and allowed his designated proxy, Dmitry Medvedev, to be elected president. But Putin was very much the power behind the throne. He became the prime minister. He waited out Medvedev's 2 terms. During that time, they changed the law to expand the 4-year term to a 6-year term, and then Putin came back in 2012 for the first of his 6-year terms. He's about to start the second of his allotted 6-year terms, and who knows what's going to happen after that. But I will say that will make him the leader who's held power longest continuously in Russia. Until this election, it would have been Stalin. Putin's just raced past him.
Very interesting and important point there. Elizabeth Palmer joining us from Crimea. Thank you.